So even just being able to sit and meditate with that, the question of, what are beautiful cultural traditions that are running through my veins, that really have rooted my ancestors of the past. How can I connect with their spirits and just sit in meditation and just see what comes through and follow that?
Hey, I'm Tanya Wilkinson, and this is Death on the Daily, bringing the conversation about death out of the shadows and into the mainstream. Because along with birth and change, if there's one thing that's going to happen to us all, then death is it. And we're going to explore how death actually shows up for us on the daily in a multitude of ways, and how when we allow ourselves to accept and to be with death, how it can teach us a whole heap about how to live this life well.
Today I want to talk about something that's really, really close to my heart, and that is my reconnection to my roots, specifically actually to my Tamil roots. My mum is Sri Lankan, and she moved to the UK during her, what was, I think back then, her O-levels. And actually she moved out of Sri Lanka, I think she was about 9, maybe 10. So she moved out of Sri Lanka quite young. And my brother and I, we really grew up not being so, I guess, connected to our Sri Lankan, to the Tamil, to the Hindu culture. Well, yes, there was cultural connections. We used to go to temple 1, 2 few times a year. We'd see my mum and my amma both praying in our house. We obviously enjoyed the food, in particular the hoppers and the curries, and my favorite egg hoppers. Oh my goodness, most amazing food. But by way, I suppose, of that kind of day to day and that deeper, that connection that sort of runs into your heart, like, yes, it's always been there. And I believe that actually in this reconnection, it's not that something died, but there was a severing of sort of certain traditions or ways of being or cultural connections. And it's something that I've been really curious on for the past few years. And this has been very much inspired by my hubby, Jordan Young, also known as Sneakernomics. If you know him for his sneaker content, you might have been a little bit curious as to, him being on my podcast to talk about his Māori culture, and specifically from the perspective of death. But hopefully that shone a spotlight on another side of Jordan. And that's where, he teaches Māori language and culture. And he's so beautifully rooted and connected into his culture, even though, Aotearoa, New Zealand is literally other side of the world. He remains rooted. And he's really inspired in me, my cultural reconnection, because I think the thing that was keeping me away from it was it felt so big, and I've seen how Jordan in particular was at university where he really sort of, I suppose, became fluent in the Māori language and, really sort of deepened his studies. But actually for me, when I was looking at my Tamil culture, I always thought I would love to learn the language, but there was always those big buts, but it's too difficult. It's, when I look at like Tamil words on a page, like, oh my goodness, how on earth could I do that? And what Jordan's really inspired in me is pushing through, I suppose, those blocks to be able to understand that actually that culture still runs through my veins. It's still deeply embedded in me. And actually it's a reconnection, one that can be really, really empowering if only we go on that journey to do it. And I would say as well, because I've had the conversation with a few people when I'm speaking about my reconnection to my Tamil roots, about the fact that, they say, oh, well, you're half Sri Lankan, and that's so, that's so exciting to reconnect to. I'm, just British or just whatever it is. And what I'd say is that actually for all of us, I believe that there's a deepening of our cultural connections and cultural roots, because, the modern world as we live in it has actually severed us from a lot of the connections, be it our connection to nature, be it to those sort of the traditions and the way of living and those sort of seasonal patterns and cycles and things that our ancestors would have been acknowledging or celebrating. There is so much richness in our cultures that we absolutely can explore. Or, even from the perspective, and I again get inspiration from Jordan, because, he used to be, when he first came to Europe, he used to go around Europe. He was a tour guide. And that was an amazing opportunity where he learned so much about history. And again, I realized, oh my goodness, like I've disconnected from history. Like it was the thing that I learned about in school, but do I go to museums? Do I engage with anything like that these days? No, I don't. So as well, our cultural connections can be rooted in many different ways. And ultimately, from what I've experienced, it can really, really enrich our experience of sort of modern day and how we move through life. So in this episode, it's going to be a bit of I guess, like a diary share of just things that I've really connected into and things that I wish I'd have done sooner. So firstly, let's look at, exploring our ancestral heritage. And this is a big one for me because I think I really missed the boat when it came to my grandparents. So I was obviously loved my grandparents, had many, many beautiful conversations with them. But in truth, I never asked them about much about sort of family history, about them. And I can really see how there would have been an opportunity to almost sit with them and to write this down, to capture it. Thankfully, there is stuff that is written down on my nan's side. But, if I think I had my Amama, my Sri Lankan grandmother, she still lives with my parents. She lived with us all the way through. I think I was about 4 when she moved in. And I could have learned so much from her around my heritage, around the cultures, around the traditions. I could have learned, and she tried to teach me how to cook things and stuff like that. But just as a kid, I really wanted to watch Nickelodeon. That's what I was most interested in. Or in my 20s, I'd be sort of like sprinting into family gatherings and then sprinting out. And unfortunately, by the time that I realized, wow, this is something that I need to do, it was too late from the perspective of, my grandparents, all of them in their dementia journeys, my Amama with her hearing. It's quite difficult to have a conversation with her. There's still things that I can speak to her about, but, not with the ease that I could have had if I'd have just sat with her, spent that time and really, really kind of understood who she is, who our family is, and what are the traditions upon which we thrived. So for me, I suppose what I'd say is, how can you connect with and embrace your cultural traditions? Who is there in your family who you could speak to? And if there isn't anyone, that's okay. Because even just an understanding of, I have this heritage can help by way of, let me go and do some Googling, let me see. But I'd also say that I'm really conscious, obviously, that for some of us, we don't have an understanding of, where our family was originally rooted. There's a lot of really awful history, whether it's slavery, whether it's, other sort of, displacements because of wars, et cetera, that has severed people from that kind of conscious understanding of their roots. But what I would say as well, if this is you, and I have real empathy because I can feel how, how difficult that may well be for those of us who are journeying in that way. I'd say, just remember that our intuition can speak through. So even just being able to sit and meditate with that, the question of, what are beautiful cultural traditions that are running through my veins, that really have rooted my ancestors of the past. How can I connect with their spirits and just sit in meditation and just see what comes through and follow that? So second up in my cultural and ancestral reconnection, we've got connecting with nature. And this is one that I love. I talk about it a lot. But I think for all of us humans, we are all humans of nature. And actually that is a tradition that for all of us that we used to very much live by. So how can we reconnect? How can we reconnect to nature's seasons and cycles? How can we reconnect to, the world out there and find that deeper presence when we're, for example, going on a walk or, just even walking through a city or, popping into a little garden and connecting with the tree? Because I find that actually it's when I'm in nature that my intuition really speaks. And when it comes to actually connection with ancestors, I actually do very regularly, kind of get messages through that I feel, my beliefs are that they're channeling through from my ancestors in co-creation with nature. And I believe that it's that space. It's that true space without, having screens on and all of the distractions of life, where actually those voices and that wisdom, that whether, it's deeply embedded in me and it's from me that my ancestors are speaking, or if it's from them from the skies. There's something really, really powerful about when we reconnect to nature. It feels like we're coming home. It can be the most grounding, the most peace-bringing experience, as well as enabling our intuition to come through with all of those messages. So I'd say on this one, it's really simple. How can you connect with nature? Even in little micro pockets. When I walk through London, I'm always connecting to plants growing through cracks in the pavement, little postage stamp size, so small little kind of like pockets where you've just got all the grasses and everything growing through it, all the way through to how can we plan more time, whether it's to, find the nearest woods or forest or, beautiful park or whatever it is, to be able to really sit with and connect with nature. And then, if we're able to, but equally this could be indoors, how could we cultivate, whether it's a garden, whether it's a window box, whether it's a little herb garden that we just have on the window in our kitchen, how can we cultivate something that is really rooting us into the earth, into nature's seasons and cycles, and really, really understand that that is a part of our cultural reconnection. And third up, we've got storytelling. So this is a tradition, and Jordan actually talked about it in our episode, that actually, Maori culture is one that has been passed down through that storytelling, and that continues. That's something that really, really roots Maori culture. And actually, this is something that is and would have been present in all of our cultures. Because if you think in the times before we had our phones, before we had Wikipedia, before we could write, that the oral tradition, the storytelling was a really, really big part of just how our family history was passed down, and it would be passed down generation to generation to generation. So how can we sit? How can we enjoy with each other? Whether it's in our family groups, in our friendships groups, how can we enjoy that storytelling of just anything that we know around our culture, around our family, around any of those things? What questions can we be asking of our loved ones in order to understand that? And, I mentioned it earlier around my wish that I'd have sat with my grandparents to be able to get this all down on paper, to create something, which I'm going to now try and create with my parents, my aunts and uncles, with my amama who is still here, to see, what she could share. I think there's a beautiful thing in us sort of reconnecting to the lost art of storytelling. And I'm really, really excited. Actually, this is something that I'm going to be going on a journey with. I might do a video about it at some point, but that journey of reconnection to, really speak to family history, to family stories, to write it down. I'm not saying that I'm going to create this into an oral tradition. I'm going to memorize it and pass it down to my children, but I certainly am going to have it written and make sure that there's something there that can then be passed on to future generations. So next up, we've got our cultural immersion. So for me, this has really been around how can I, week on week, immerse in Tamil culture? What feels like something that would really inspire me? And it was the language side of things, something that I was thinking about for a while, but had always sort of pushed to the back, thinking, no, this is going to be too difficult. How on earth am I going to do this? But then when I went out there, I found an amazing Tamil teacher. She's called Yuga. And I've been flowing through my Tamil lessons, I think, since last autumn, maybe summer. And I'm loving them. It's a weekly commitment. I will not step away from that weekly commitment. If I miss it for whatever reason, then I double up the following week. And I'm really, really seeing a lot of progress by way of, now I can string together sort of simple sentences, and I can sort of hold my own in certain conversations, but actually just taking the pressure off of myself. It's fun. This is really about reconnecting to my roots, and it's really about honoring myself and my roots and my ancestors, and being able to, through that, have a deeper dialogue with myself. That's the meaning that I bring into this. And for you, the meaning that you bring into whatever cultural immersion that you select is going to be completely different. And I also think for me as a British person, I think this is really, really important. For me personally, because when I've traveled around the world, I've always felt a lot of unease at the fact that I've never been sort of good at languages, that's quite a label, but I've never thought of myself as good as languages. And therefore I've been quite unconfident. So even in spaces where I know a little bit, like France, I just used to hold back. And if someone speaks English, I will default to that. I won't try to speak their language. And actually for me, that's a bit of a colonizer's kind of mentality, isn't it? It's sort of like, where I go, you will speak English. And I think there's something really, really powerful, you know, where I speak to people who, you know, when I mention around the Tamil side or whatever, they're like, oh, you know, I've got Polish ancestry, or yeah, I've got a bit, you know, French ancestry or whatever, you know, and there's that thought of, oh, yeah, I should be doing this. And I think it's really, really powerful that, you know, language can be a real sort of reconnector to our culture. But also, you know, if you say, I actually don't know of any other languages that are part of my ancestry, but equally, it could be just something, you know, if you wanted to, I don't want anyone to feel left out. It could be something where you just go, you know what? I'm just going to go and learn a language that I feel inspired by. I feel really inspired to learn Japanese, to learn Spanish. I was actually speaking to someone just yesterday who is off to Japan on a trip, and she's been learning the language. I was like, that is amazing. That's so awesome. So, you know, if you feel called to, then join me in reconnecting to culture through that sort of gift of language. And what I'll do here is I will just bring into it a little snippet so you can see that I'm actually doing it, a little snippet from one of my Tamil lessons with my dear and wonderful teacher and friend, Yuga.
வணக்கம் சானியா.
வணக்கம் யூகா.
எப்படி இருக்கிறீங்க?
நான் நல்லா இருக்கிறேன். எப்படி இருக்கிறீங்க?
நானும் நல்லா இருக்கிறேன் சானியா. சரி, காலம் எத்தனை மணிக்கு எழும்பினீங்கள் இன்றைக்கு?
நான் 7 மணிக்கு எழும்பினேன்.
பேருந்து என்ன செய்த நீங்கள்?
பேய்ந்த நான் தியானம் செய்தேன். பேய்ந்த யோகா செய்தேன். பெரிசும் சாப்பிட்டான். இந்த நாய கொண்டு வெளியில போனேன்.
சரி.
இந்த இப்ப வகுப்புக்கு வந்தான்.
வாவ், நல்லா கதைக்கிறீங்க இப்ப தமிழ். உங்களோட தமிழை பார்க்க எனக்கு சந்தோஷமா இருக்கு. நல்ல முன்னேற்றம் இருக்கு உங்களோட தமிழ்ல. மிக்க நன்றி தானியா.
மிக்க நன்றி யூகா.
Perfect.
Then the other way that we can have our cultural immersion and really reconnect to our roots is obviously in visiting the ancestral land. So, you know, for me, I've been to Sri Lanka only a couple of times in my life, but I've been thinking actually I need to plan a trip, and I need to do it sort of, I suppose, in this frame, in this mindset I'm in now, which I definitely wasn't in. I think it was over 10 years ago when I last went, you know, to be able to go and root into it from the perspective of the lands where my mum, my aunts and uncles, my amama, my apapa, and sort of all of their ancestry where they have walked. And the other side of cultural immersion might be spiritual practices, if that's something that you wish to. You know, obviously we all have our own beliefs. For me, it's actually been around how can I bring the Hindu traditions into my spiritual beliefs? Because my spiritual beliefs are, I don't know if I would call myself Hindu. There's definitely parts of me that really sort of identify with Hindu tradition, but I'd say it sort of goes broader than the Hindu religion by way of just, yeah, I'd say I've always sort of seen myself as quite a, I suppose a spiritual versus a religious person. But what I found really grounding and really rooting in, you know, Hindu celebrations and rooting in Tamil celebrations and bringing that in, but doing it in a really intuitive way. So this is an area where I do sort of shy away from, I suppose, I do Google traditions, but I equally allow my creativity to come in and say, okay, let me see what, you know, for example, Navaratri is all about. But let me do it my way. So what do I feel inspired to do? What nature ceremony or, you know, what sort of meditation mini retreat do I feel inspired to create for myself? So what I'd say is really it's about personalizing this. Personalize it to you. And by way of doing that, just really listen within. Within our cultural reconnection, I believe that one of the most powerful things that we can do is to allow our intuition to speak, to allow that inner wisdom to guide us, because sometimes it'll be reconnecting to traditions, maybe just getting awareness of them, but actually doing it your way. That's exactly what I do. So personalization is key, and really understanding that actually within this, it should feel joyful. There's nothing, it shouldn't be like a chore. It should be something where, a bit like me with my Tamil lessons, every single week, I feel really good and I really, really enjoy and love them, you know, so much more than I ever could have imagined. And so we finish every episode with a note to self. So in today's note to self is a really, really simple message, which actually is very much to me now, but it's something that I wish I could have said to myself, like literally when I was a child, to have had that really embedded in me. And this note to self is, I'm a rich tapestry woven of my ancestors and me. Now it's time to understand some of the threads that make up who I am. And the reason that this really hits home for me is because I definitely can see, how many decades I was disconnected from my culture, how I pushed away certain aspects, a bit like, even sort of going to temple with my mum or other things that I now just think, wow, I can feel how enriching they were versus the Nickelodeon or the McDonald's food court or wherever I was hanging out. But, the gift of time, the gift of hindsight. And obviously, I was on my own little mission when I was in my teens, when I was in my 20s. But actually, what I've learned, throughout all of this life is that there is no time like the present. So if you feel like there's, aspects of your culture or stories that haven't been spoken in your family or things that you want to kind of put pen to paper on and get down and make sure that you can capture so that future generations can also sort of read those stories, I really would say, there is no time like the present to start. So that completes this episode of Death on the Daily. And wherever you are in this journey, wherever you are in your cultural connection or disconnection, just go with grace and compassion and know that I am sending you lots and lots of love.
All of my gratitude to you for joining me for another Dead Conversation. Death on the Daily is edited by David Strutt. The music is Set Free by Katie Gray. And I am Tanya Wilkinson. And if you enjoyed this episode, I would be over the moon if you can rate, review, and subscribe. It really, really helps me to get the word out there. And if you want to say hi or to hear more about my work as a coach and death doula, including how I support my clients to navigate their death on the daily, then all of the ways that you can connect with me are in the show notes. I'll be back soon with some more Dead Conversations. And in the meantime, take good care of yourself and others.
There's a cold fire, there's a crossfire, and there's something